don't even know his last name. Yet tonight, I'm lying in a hotel bed beside a man whose eyes feel like they've already rewritten the rest of my life. Naomi Carter would remember that thought for years, the sharp, reckless edge of it, because she knew she was the kind of woman who made plans, who organized her days into neat little squares on a calendar, who kept receipts, paid bills early, and hated surprises. And yet that night in Chicago, all the rules she clung to scattered like glass in a thunderstorm. The storm had begun hours earlier, rumbling across Lake Michigan, with a roar that made the windows of O'Hare Airport tremble. By midnight, flight after flight blinked from delayed to canceled. Travelers slumped on rows of uncomfortable seats, children wailed, businessmen cursed into phones, and Naomi, clutching her carry-on like it held her last hope, stood in line at the service desk, her patience bleeding out with every lightning strike. She'd come to Chicago for a 3-day marketing conference, her first chance in months to pitch her ideas face-to-face, instead of through cold emails that vanished unanswered. And now the return flight that was supposed to carry her home to Atlanta, back to her small apartment, her waiting freelance projects, her peace, was gone. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry," the airline agent said gently. "We can rebook you for tomorrow afternoon." Naomi's jaw tightened. "Tomorrow afternoon, that's 15 hours from now." "Yes, ma'am. Every outbound flight is grounded until the system clears." Naomi exhaled hard. The airport buzzed with chaos, an energy both frantic and exhausted. She wasn't the kind of woman who broke down in public, but the thought of another sleepless night on a stiff chair, surrounded by strangers and fluorescent lights, made her shoulders sag. "Hotel vouchers," she asked, already expecting the answer. The agent grimaced. "We've distributed the last of them. You might try downtown. Some hotels still have space, but they're filling quickly." So she left. Rain lashed the cab windows like sharp fingers. The driver muttered curses in Polish under his breath as traffic snarled in waterlogged streets. By the time Naomi reached the Harbor Grand Hotel, her shoes were soaked, her curls heavy with rain. She must have looked desperate, damp blouse clinging to her mascara faintly smudged, because the receptionist's smile faltered the moment Naomi dropped her credit card on the counter. "Please tell me you still have rooms," Naomi whispered, her voice frayed. The receptionist tapped keys, winced, tapped again. "We do, ma'am." But Naomi's stomach dropped. "But what? It's a shared suite. We had to combine guests due to the storm. It's either that or... The receptionist glanced apologetically at the window where sheets of rain pounded like artillery fire. "Or you go back out there." Naomi gripped the counter. A shared suite. With a stranger, every instinct screamed no. Yet the thought of dragging her bag through another cab ride, another lobby with another rejection, broke her resolve. "I'll take it." Her voice was sharper than she intended. The receptionist handed over the key card, eyes flicking with hesitation. "Room 1904. The other guest has already checked in." The hallway smelled faintly of cedar polish and rainwater. Naomi paused outside room 1904, her key card trembling in her grip. For a heartbeat, she considered turning back, sleeping in the lobby instead, but exhaustion pressed down heavier than fear. The lock clicked open. Warm light spilled across a modern suite, leather armchair, glass table, floor-to-ceiling windows trembling beneath the storm's fury. And standing near the minibar sleeves, pushed up whiskey glass in hand, was a man. Not just a man. Tall, broad-shouldered, his presence filling the space like gravity itself. Dark hair mussed as though he'd run his hands through it a dozen times. A sharp jaw softened only by the stubble that shadowed it, and eyes so vividly blue they seemed to glow against the storm outside. He turned slowly, gaze locking onto hers. For a moment, the storm outside was nothing compared to the electricity in that stare. "They told you." His voice was low, steady, almost too calm. "That I'd be sleeping next to a man I've never met." Naomi dropped her bag with a thud. "Yeah, real charming." The corner of his mouth curved, not a smile, not yet, but something that hinted at one. "You can take the bed. I'll take the couch." Naomi hesitated, caught between suspicion and reluctant gratitude. "We'll split it," she said. "I'm not a damsel." His brow lifted slightly. "Noted." The storm clawed at the windows as Naomi shed her wet jacket and slipped into the bathroom. When she emerged in a hotel robe, damp curls piled into a knot, he was already stretched on the far side of the bed, scrolling through his phone. She tried not to look. Tried not to notice the way his shirt clung to lean muscle, the quiet authority in the way he reclined. Naomi slipped into the opposite side blanket, pulled up to her chin. For a long while, silence reigned. Not awkward, more like two souls circling the edges of something they weren't ready to name. Then softly he said, "Storms keep you up too." Naomi stared at the ceiling. "They remind me I don't control anything." His gaze shifted toward her, shadowed, but intent. "That's honest." "And you?" she asked, turning slightly. "I sleep better when someone else is breathing in the room." It wasn't flirtation. It was something raw, unguarded. Naomi's chest tightened. She should have ended the conversation, turned away, buried herself in sleep. But instead she whispered, "What's your name?" He hesitated as though deciding how much to give. "Ethan." "Naomi." The syllables lingered in the stormlit room, like a vow neither of them intended to make. It began with the smallest accident, her hand brushing his as she shifted under the blanket. A graze, a pause, a pulse of warmth that neither pulled away from. Ethan turned slowly, blue eyes darkened by something unsaid. "You don't seem like the kind of woman who shares hotel rooms with strangers," he murmured. Naomi's laugh was soft, brittle. "I'm not. But tonight isn't exactly a choice, is it?" Sometimes, he said, his gaze locking with hers, the things we don't plan for show us who we really are. She swallowed hard, throat tight. "And who do you think I am?" For a heartbeat, he studied her as though he already knew. Someone who's tired of being strong all the time. Her breath caught, and then he leaned closer, cautious, deliberate, giving her every chance to stop him. She didn't. The kiss was not reckless, not hungry. It was something rarer, gentle, reverent, like two lonely people borrowing warmth against the storm. And when his hand cupped her cheek, when her fingers curled into his shirt, Naomi realized something terrifying. This wasn't just a mistake. This felt like the beginning of something permanent. Naomi woke to sunlight pushing weakly through the curtains. The storm was gone. The bed was warm, the space beside her empty. Ethan was gone too. Only a folded towel in the bathroom, a faint trace of cedar and rain on the pillow, and the echo of his voice saying her name. Naomi pressed her hand to her lips, closing her eyes. No promises, no last names, no expectations. Just a night that should have stayed anonymous. And yet weeks later, when she stood barefoot in her Atlanta apartment, staring at 2 pink lines on a pregnancy test, Naomi whispered his name again, Ethan, and knew her life would never be the same. Naomi Carter had never been afraid of silence. Silence had raised her, carried her through nights when her father's promises dissolved into absence, and her mother's laughter echoed only in memory. She thought she knew how to live with it, how to wrap it around herself like armor. But silence was different when it lived inside her. It began as a flutter, almost nothing, a missed period, a skipped meal, a restless night. She blamed travel stress, the storm in Chicago that had tossed her plans into chaos. She told herself her body was simply recalibrating. But 3 weeks later, standing in the cramped bathroom of her Atlanta apartment, the truth blinked at her in 2 pink lines. Naomi sat on the floor, knees drawn tight to her chest, her palms pressed against cool tile. She tried to breathe, but the air felt heavy, thicker than the silence she'd once mastered. The world expected women to choose, as though choices were neat things with tidy endings. Keep it or not. Tell him or don't. But choices never worked like that. They tangled into consequences, into futures that whispered and roared at the same time. Naomi stared at the test still balanced on the sink. A part of her wanted to laugh. How absurd that one night, one moment of surrender could alter everything. Another part wanted to scream. She didn't. Instead, she rose slowly, like her body belonged to someone else, and pressed her hand against her stomach. There was no swell yet, no proof beyond lines on plastic. But she felt it anyway, the knowledge settling deep, unshakable. This wasn't a decision. This was already a life. Jasmine Brown barged into Naomi's apartment the next morning, without knocking, as always. Best friend since high school, force of nature, sharp tongue, laced with gold-hearted loyalty. "Girl, you missed brunch," Jasmine announced, tossing her purse onto the couch. "And nobody stands me up for mimosas, not even Jesus." Naomi stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, her shirt wrinkled, her curls pulled into a messy knot, eyes red from a night without sleep. Jasmine stopped. "Okay, what's wrong?" Naomi didn't answer. She simply walked to the counter, picked up the pregnancy test, and slid it across, like it was evidence in a trial she couldn't win. Jasmine's eyes widened. Her painted nails tapped the plastic once, twice. "Oh, my God." She looked up slowly. "Is it?" Naomi whispered the name before she could stop herself. "Ethan." Jasmine's jaw dropped. "The Chicago guy, the one-night storm fling guy, Naomi. You don't even know his last name." Naomi's throat tightened. She wanted to say it hadn't been just that. It hadn't been just sex. It had been safety warmth a night that made her remember she wasn't unlovable. But how did you explain a feeling you barely understood yourself? So she whispered instead, "I know enough." The days turned into weeks. Naomi worked when she could, drafting marketing copy for clients who would never know she was carrying a secret behind every word. She sipped ginger tea for nausea, closed her laptop early when fatigue anchored her limbs, and avoided mirrors that seemed to ask questions she wasn't ready to answer. At night, she searched. She typed Ethan Chicago Tech CEO into Google, only to drown in a sea of names and faces she didn't recognize. She remembered his eyes, his voice, the way he'd said her name, like it was fragile glass. But how do you find a man when all you have is first name and memory? And maybe she thought, in her weakest moments, maybe she didn't want to find him. Because if she did, if she stood in front of him and told him what, then would he laugh? Deny offer money as though her child was a transaction, or worse, would he want custody? The thought made her clutch her stomach, protective, before there was even a bump. The first ultrasound was nothing like Naomi expected. The room smelled like disinfectant and printer ink. The gel was cold against her skin. She braced for disappointment, for emptiness. But then, there it was. A shape small and curled, and the steady rhythm of life. Thump, thump, thump. Naomi's breath caught. The nurse smiled softly. Strong heartbeat. Everything looks good. Naomi couldn't move, couldn't speak. All she could do was stare at the screen and feel her eyes blur with tears. It wasn't just hers anymore. The silence was gone. She whispered to the tiny flicker, "I see you." and for the first time, she let herself smile. Joy was fragile. Fear followed quickly like a shadow. How would she raise a child in a one-bedroom apartment where the heat clicked out every other winter? How would she afford diapers when some weeks she stretched instant noodles across 2 dinners? Jasmine helped, yes, filling her fridge, holding her hand when nausea bent her double. But Jasmine wasn't the one carrying the weight. Late one night, Naomi sat at her desk with a notepad. Across the top she wrote, "Reasons to tell him. He deserves to know. The baby deserves a father. I can't do this alone." Then beneath it, reasons not to. He's powerful. He could take her. He might not care. One night doesn't make a promise. The page stared back at her, cruel in its simplicity. She tore it in half. Pregnancy dreams were strange. At least that's what the blog said. But Naomi's dreams weren't just strange, they were haunting. She dreamed of blue eyes glowing in the dark of a storm that never ended, of a child standing on a shoreline calling for a father who never came. She woke, gasping, palm pressed to her stomach, as though to promise her unborn child she would never let that happen. Some mornings, she whispered names, testing them like prayers. Isabella. Bella. A name that meant strength wrapped in grace. She would need both. By the time Naomi reached her 2nd trimester, her mind was made. Not about telling Ethan that wound stayed open untouchable, but about the child. She would keep her. She would fight for her. She would love her without apology. Naomi stood at her window one evening, watching Atlanta's skyline bleed into night. The city was loud, restless, alive, and so was she. Her hand pressed to the gentle swell of her belly. "You're already real," she whispered. "Even if no one else knows yet, you're mine." The words settled into her bones like truth. One Saturday, Jasmine dragged Naomi to a small cafe near Piedmont Park. The air smelled of coffee beans and warm pastries. Naomi sipped chamomile tea while Jasmine studied her over the rim of her latte. "You're glowing," Jasmine said finally. Naomi laughed softly. "That's code for, you're tired, but hiding it." No, Jasmine leaned closer. "It's code for, you're in love with an idea. Don't be. Don't fall for a ghost. He was one night. That's all." Naomi's throat ached, but she held Jasmine's gaze. "It wasn't just one night. It was the first time I didn't feel alone." Jasmine's expression softened. She reached across the table, squeezed Naomi's hand. "Then remember, this don't confuse feeling safe with being safe. Protect yourself. Protect her." Naomi nodded, though her chest felt heavy. Because she knew Jasmine was right. Safety was fleeting. Only love could be permanent. As months passed, Naomi grew rounder, slower, more careful. Strangers held doors for her, offered seats on buses, smiled at the glow Jasmine insisted was real. Naomi decorated the spare corner of her bedroom with a crib she found secondhand, sanded smooth with her own hands. She bought baby clothes in soft yellows and greens, avoiding pinks and blues that felt like promises she wasn't ready to make. And every night, she whispered stories to the life within her. Not about princes or castles, but about resilience, about laughter, about the way storms end and skies clear. She never mentioned his name. Not yet. By her 8th month, Naomi had stopped searching the internet, stopped typing Ethan Chicago Tech into bars that gave her nothing but strangers. She decided he belonged to another life, one she had visited for a night and would never return to. But the secret had grown too large to hide. Her child was coming, and with her would come truths Naomi couldn't bury forever. One evening, as rain tapped against her apartment window, gentle this time, almost kind, Naomi closed her eyes and imagined blue eyes meeting hers again. She didn't know it yet, But storms have a way of circling back, and this one was far from over. Naomi Carter never thought sound could break her so completely. But when the sharp, trembling cry of her daughter filled the sterile hospital room, her body folded in on itself. Not from pain, though. Pain had wrung her dry for hours, but from release, from the truth that could no longer be hidden. A nurse placed the small, squirming bundle on her chest. Warm, damp, fragile. Naomi's arms trembled as she gathered the child close, pressing her lips to curls that already carried the faintest hint of texture, like soft rain clouds. "Hello," she whispered, voice hoarse. "Hello, my Bella." Her daughter's tiny hand curled instinctively around Naomi's finger, and just like that, silence was no longer Naomi's companion. It had been replaced by a heartbeat she could hold. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and new linens. Machines beeped softly. Outside the window, Atlanta's skyline shimmered beneath morning rain. Naomi had imagined this moment 1,000 ways alone, scared or triumphant. The reality was both harsher and sweeter. Jasmine sat slumped in a chair. Makeup smudged her hand, still wrapped protectively around Naomi's wrist. She had stayed through the night, whispering encouragement, wiping tears. Naomi refused to admit were fear. Now Jasmine stirred, blinking awake. She saw the baby and let out a half laugh, half sob. "She's real." Naomi smiled faintly. "She's mine. She's yours." Jasmine agreed softer now, as though speaking a prayer. When Bella opened her eyes for the first time, Naomi froze. They weren't newborn gray. They weren't hazel like hers. They were blue, striking unmistakable, the color of a storm calmed, but never forgotten. Naomi's chest tightened until it hurt. The room blurred around her. For a moment she couldn't breathe. Jasmine saw it too. Her gaze flicked from the baby to Naomi. "Those are his eyes." Naomi swallowed hard. She kissed Bella's forehead, steadying herself. "They're hers now." Hospitals had their own rhythm nurses, sweeping in with quiet authority machines, humming hallway wheels, squeaking. Yet in the cocoon of her room, Naomi lived in another world entirely. She sang softly songs her mother once hummed, though the words blurred and her voice cracked. She fed Bella clumsily, one hand awkward with the bottle, the other trembling with exhaustion. Every burp, every sigh, every tiny sound carved its way into Naomi's memory. At 3 a.m., she caught her reflection in the window. Dark circles, damp curls, stuck to her forehead, hospital gown, loose and wrinkled. She looked nothing like the polished woman who had once strutted into conference halls with a portfolio and bright ambition. And yet she thought she had never looked more alive. By the second day, Jasmine had taken over as unofficial manager of the room, fetching water, barking at nurses when they moved too slowly, snapping photos Naomi barely allowed. But when Bella slept, Jasmine grew serious. She sat on the bed's edge, her eyes fixed on Naomi. "You have to tell him." Naomi stiffened. "Not now. Not now isn't the same as never." Naomi cradled Bella closer. "She doesn't need his money. She doesn't need his name. She has me. She deserves the truth," Jasmine pressed. "And so do you." Naomi turned away. Through the glass window, the sky was still swollen with clouds. Truth can destroy as much as it saves. Jasmine sighed, squeezing her shoulder. "Just promise me you won't carry this lie forever." Naomi didn't answer. Back in her apartment, the world looked smaller. The crib in the corner seemed too delicate for the weight of responsibility it held. Diapers stacked beside the dresser looked endless and yet insufficient. Naomi moved through her days in a haze, feeding, changing, soothing, repeating. At night, exhaustion pulled her under so quickly, she sometimes woke in panic, unsure if she'd fallen asleep holding the baby. And yet woven through the fatigue was wonder. Bella's first yawn, wide and startling. The way her fingers spread when she dreamed. The gentle rhythm of her breathing against Naomi's chest. Every sound, every gesture made the storm of Chicago seem like a lifetime ago. And yet its ghost was in the child's eyes every day. While Naomi's world shrank to bottles and lullabies, Ethan Walker's world expanded ruthlessly. The boardroom smelled of leather and ambition. Men in tailored suits shuffled papers, whispered. Strategies glanced nervously at the man at the head of the table. Ethan sat tall, spine-straight eyes, cold as glass. He was 32, CEO of Walker Tech, a company that had swallowed competitors and turned him into one of New York's youngest billionaires. To the press, he was disciplined, enigmatic, untouchable. To his board, he was a storm wrapped in silence. But when he leaned back and rubbed the bridge of his nose, his assistant Marcus caught the flicker of weariness. Ethan's nights were sleepless. His bed was empty, and though no one in the room knew it, he still dreamed of a woman's voice whispering his name in the dark. He never told anyone about Chicago. Not his father, not Marcus, not the investors who would devour any hint of weakness. But sometimes in the quiet after a 12-hour day, he caught himself searching crowds for a face he didn't deserve to remember. Naomi began writing letters she never sent. Dear Ethan, she started scrawled on the back of an electric bill. You don't know this, but you have a daughter. Her name is Isabella. She has your eyes. I wish I could hate that, but I don't. She folded the paper and shoved it into a drawer. Another letter began. I don't want your money. I just thought you should know. That one too went unsent. It wasn't fear of his rejection that stopped her. It was fear of his acceptance. Fear that once he knew her life, Bella's life would no longer be theirs alone. It was a small thing, hardly unusual for newborns, a mild fever, flushed cheeks, restless cries. But for Naomi, it was terror. She rushed Bella to the pediatric ER hands, trembling as she filled out forms. Hours stretched long and merciless as doctors examined, tested, reassured. Viral. Nothing dangerous. She'll be fine. Naomi sat in the dim corner of the waiting room rocking Bella until the fever eased. She pressed her lips to her daughter's forehead, whispering promises she hadn't made even to herself. I will never let you feel unwanted. Never. Her voice cracked, but her resolve did not. Naomi washed bottles by hand under flickering kitchen lights, her mind a blend of lullabies and unpaid bills. Ethan stood beneath chandeliers, signing contracts worth millions, his name etched on glass towers. 2 lives, 2 cities bound by a storm and a child neither spoke of. And yet threads were tightening. Choices were circling back. One evening, Naomi watched Bella sleeping, her tiny fist curled against her cheek. Outside Atlanta, rain tapped the glass, steady and relentless. Naomi's reflection stared back at her, tired, unpolished, stronger than she'd ever been. She thought of Ethan, of blue eyes she had tried to forget, of the truth she carried like a weight pressing into her chest. I can't hide you forever, she whispered to her daughter. But for now, you're mine, just mine. She kissed Bella's forehead. And somewhere hundreds of miles away, Ethan Walker stood on the rooftop of his Manhattan penthouse, rain streaking his face, and whispered into the night, Naomi. Naomi Carter had never belonged in places like this. The West Village campus of the Walker Foundation gleamed like it had been carved from glass and light. Chandeliers dripped gold across the marble floors. Violins threaded soft notes through the air, and women in silk gowns glided past men in tuxedos, as if they were all actors in a play Naomi had stumbled into without rehearsal. She wasn't here for the champagne or the speeches. She was here because fate had pushed her hand, and because her daughter, her Bella, deserved more than silence. Naomi adjusted the small carrier strapped against her chest, her hand brushing gently over the blanket that hid Bella's face. "We don't belong here," she whispered under her breath, but Bella stirred softly, eyes fluttering as if to say, "We belong wherever the truth takes us." The air buzzed with curated wealth. Waiters floated past with trays of crystal glasses. Donors laughed in corners, where deals were disguised as small talk. And at the center of it all, unseen for now, was the man Naomi had spent months trying to erase from her heart. Her chest tightened at the thought. Ethan Walker, CEO, philanthropist, the stranger who had once whispered her name in a storm-lit hotel room, the man whose eyes her daughter now carried like a birthright. Naomi's friend Jasmine had begged her not to come. "This is insane, Nay. You can't just show up at a billionaire's gala with a baby strapped to your chest. That's not disclosure, that's a headline." But Naomi hadn't listened, because sometimes silence was louder than a scream, and tonight she was done being silent. In the private lounge behind the ballroom, Ethan adjusted his cufflinks, his expression carved into composure. To the press, he was the evening's host. To his board, he was the man who had secured $30 million for a community redevelopment project. He was supposed to glide out there, deliver his speech at 8:35, shake hands, smile, once for the cameras, and vanish before dessert. That was the plan. Ethan lived by plans, but plans never accounted for storms. Marcus, his assistant, appeared at the door, face oddly pale. "Sir," he began, voice low. "There's someone in the lobby asking for you. She won't give her last name." Ethan didn't look up from his watch. "Handle it." Marcus hesitated. "She says it's about Boston." The word dropped like stone into water. Ethan froze, every muscle taut. Slowly he lifted his gaze. Boston. Marcus nodded. "She's early 30s, brown skin, natural curls. She has a baby with her." Ethan's pulse slammed hard enough he almost lost the rhythm of his breath. "What color are the baby's eyes?" "Blue," Marcus whispered. Ethan's glass slipped against the bar, whiskey sloshing over the rim. Naomi stood by the grand staircase, Bella rocking lightly in her carrier. The baby's small hand peeked from the blanket fingers, curling as if reaching for something unseen. Naomi's heart thundered in her ears. The sound of approaching footsteps pulled her eyes up, and there he was. Ethan Walker cut through the crowd like the storm he was. Black suit, sharp shoulders, the kind of presence that made people shift unconsciously to clear his path. For a moment, Naomi thought he looked unchanged, still the man who had once whispered honesty in the dark. But then his eyes met hers, and she realized the distance of a year had carved something harder into him. His gaze dropped to the bundle on her chest, and he stopped walking. The lobby dissolved into static. The clinking of cutlery, the swell of music, all of it vanished beneath the silence that stretched between them. Naomi's throat tightened. "I didn't come for money." His voice was a rasp, almost unrecognizable. "But you came." Naomi nodded once. "Because you deserve to know." He stepped closer, every movement measured like a man approaching something fragile and dangerous at once. His eyes locked on the baby. The blanket shifted. Bella stirred, blinking awake. And then Ethan saw it, the impossible, undeniable truth, staring back at him in two storm-blue eyes. His own. Ethan's throat locked. His voice cracked on words that felt unreal. "She's mine." Naomi's chest tightened. "Her name is Isabella. Bella. She's 10 months old. He stared at the child, then at Naomi, disbelief and something deeper warring in his face. Grief, maybe. Awe. Anger. You left, he said quietly. No note, no number, nothing. Naomi swallowed. I was scared. Of me, his voice sharpened. No, she whispered. Of everything. Of what it might cost me. Of what it might cost her. The lobby was too exposed. Too loud. Ethan's jaw flexed tension, drawing lines across his face. Without another word, he turned, gesturing for her to follow. Naomi hesitated, heart pounding, but something in his stance left no room for refusal. They ended up in a sleek conference room. Glass walls, marble table, soft lighting that made every shadow sharper. Ethan leaned against the table, arms folded. Naomi rocked Bella gently, trying to steady her own breath. You thought I'd hurt you? He asked, voice low. Naomi shook her head. I thought you'd take her, and you have the power to do it. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Ethan's jaw clenched. His voice came quieter this time. Do you think I'm that man? Naomi's eyes burned. I didn't know what kind of man you were. That night wasn't about names or bank accounts. I didn't know you were Ethan Walker. I just knew you made me feel safe. For the first time that evening, Ethan's face softened. Barely. Then you left, he said, and you didn't stop me. Bella fussed softly in her carrier, her tiny mouth opening in complaint. Naomi lifted her out, settling her against her chest. Ethan's eyes followed the movement like he couldn't look away. Can I hold her? He asked suddenly. Naomi froze. 3 words yet. They stole the breath from her lungs. Her arms tightened instinctively around Bella. Once you hold her, you won't be a stranger anymore. Ethan didn't move closer. He only extended his arms, steady open, waiting. Naomi's fingers trembled. For a moment, fear nearly won. But then Bella turned her head, eyes blinking up at the man who had given her those eyes. Naomi exhaled shakily and placed her daughter in Ethan's arms. For a man who had commanded boardrooms and empires without blinking, Ethan looked undone. He held Bella as though she were spun from glass and starlight. His breath shuddered when her tiny fingers curled around his. She knows who you are, Naomi whispered. His throat tightened. So do I. Minutes passed in silence. Ethan studied Bella's face, her soft curls, her chubby cheeks, the way her head rested against his chest. For the first time in years, he looked fragile. When Bella let out a soft sigh, Ethan's eyes closed. I've never seen myself in anyone before, he admitted quietly. Not until now. Naomi felt her heart split open, raw and terrified. She had come here for truth, not for this, whatever this was. Ethan finally looked at her. His voice steady, but his eyes unsteady. You should have told me sooner. Naomi swallowed shame, prickling her skin. You're right. I lost 10 months. Their gazes locked, and for the first time since that night in Boston, neither of them looked away. A knock sounded faintly on the door. Marcus's voice filtered through. Sir, your speech starts in 10 minutes. Ethan's jaw tightened. He didn't move, didn't hand Bella back immediately. When he did, the reluctance in his hands was undeniable. Naomi adjusted the blanket around her daughter, her own breath uneven. We should go, she whispered. Ethan straightened, but his eyes stayed on hers. Can I see you again? Naomi hesitated. To see her. His gaze didn't waver. To see both of you. For a moment, Naomi forgot how to breathe. Minutes later, Ethan Walker stood on the gala stage cameras, flashing applause rising like a tide. His voice carried through the ballroom, smooth and practiced. Tonight isn't about wealth. It's about what we leave behind. The kind of impact that outlives us. The crowd nodded, charmed. But Ethan's mind wasn't on the donors or the speech. It was on the child who had gripped his finger like a promise, and the woman whose eyes had haunted him long before he knew her name. And Naomi, leaving the building with Bella tucked close, whispered into her daughter's hair, "This is only the beginning." The storm had circled back, and this time, no one would walk away untouched. Naomi Carter had walked away from Ethan Walker once, but she knew this time it wouldn't be so simple. Because now every step she took carried the weight of a child with blue eyes who belonged to both of them. The night after the gala, Naomi sat in her apartment in Atlanta, Bella asleep in her crib, the faint hum of the city outside her window. She thought the storm had ended when she left New York, but she hadn't realized Ethan was the kind of man who never let storms end. They followed him, clung to him, and swallowed anyone who dared get close. Her phone buzzed again, the third time that evening. Unknown number. She didn't answer. 3 days later, Naomi opened her door and nearly dropped the laundry basket in her arms. Ethan Walker stood in the hallway of her modest apartment building, a man who looked as if he had stepped out of another world and landed clumsily in hers. The hallway smelled faintly of detergent and fried food from the neighbor's kitchen. Ethan looked out of place, his tailored coat catching on the cracked paint of the stairwell, his polished shoes scuffing against floors dulled by years of tenants. Her voice was sharp. "How did you find me?" His eyes met hers, steady and unflinching. "I'm not here to talk about that." Naomi's hand tightened around the basket. "You shouldn't be here. I had to see her," he said simply. Naomi's chest ached. She wanted to slam the door to protect the fragile bubble she had built for Bella. But even as she thought it, Bella's small cry echoed from the crib inside, as if calling him by instinct. Ethan's gaze flicked toward the sound, his expression softening. "Please." The word broke something in her. She stepped aside. Inside, Ethan looked around the tiny apartment. He didn't judge, but Naomi felt it anyway. His silence filled the space with contrast. The second-hand furniture, the mismatched curtains, the stack of unpaid bills on the counter. All of it seemed smaller beneath the weight of his presence. Naomi lifted Bella from her crib, her arms automatically protective. Ethan moved closer, slow and deliberate, until he stood right before them. "May I?" His voice was quiet. Naomi hesitated, then allowed it. Ethan took Bella, carefully holding her, as though she were the only thing in the world he feared to break. Bella studied him with wide eyes, and then, to Naomi's surprise, let out a gurgling laugh. Ethan's chest rose sharply like the sound had cracked him open. "She knows me," he whispered. Naomi's arms folded across her chest. "She knows warmth. Don't mistake that for you." Ethan's gaze snapped to hers, the softness gone. "She's mine as much as yours." The words struck like lightning. Naomi's breath caught fury and fear colliding in her chest. "No, she's mine. I carried her. I fed her. I sat in emergency rooms at 3 a.m. when her fever spiked and no one else was there. Don't stand in my living room and claim equality because you share DNA." Ethan flinched, but didn't back down. "I'm not asking to erase what you've done. I'm asking to be part of it." Naomi's throat tightened. "And if I say no?" His jaw hardened. "Then you'll be fighting me. And Naomi, I don't want to fight you. But I will if it means she grows up knowing her father." When he finally left that evening, Naomi sat in silence long after Bella fell asleep. She replayed his words, his tone, the way Bella had laughed in his arms, like she already belonged to him. Fear pressed heavy against her ribs. Because Ethan wasn't just a man, he was power. He had the resources, the influence, the kind of reach that could crush her if he wanted. But what scared her most wasn't his power. It was that maybe, just maybe, Bella deserved him. It started with a whisper, then spread like wildfire. Tech mogul's mystery child walker seen with woman and infant after gala. The article flashed across Naomi's phone one morning while she sipped cold coffee at her kitchen table. A blurry photograph captured Ethan standing too close to her at the gala entrance, his gaze fixed on the baby carrier strapped to her chest. The caption spun speculation into certainty. Her stomach dropped. Within hours, reporters gathered outside her building. Questions fired like bullets whenever she stepped outside. Is Walker the father? How long have you two been involved? Is this an affair? Naomi clutched Bella tight, head bowed against the onslaught. She hadn't given them permission to tear her life apart yet. Here they were, clawing for pieces of it. That night she called Jasmine, her voice breaking. I can't protect her from this. Jasmine's reply was firm. Then you stop trying to do it alone. 2 nights later, Ethan appeared again, this time in a car that gleamed beneath the flicker of streetlights. He stood on her doorstep with an expression Naomi couldn't read, part fury, part desperation. You should have called me when the press showed up, he said. Naomi's arms wrapped protectively around Bella. I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask for any of it. Ethan stepped closer, his voice low but fierce. And you think I did? You think I wanted the world to speculate about my child like she's gossip column fodder? She deserves better than this circus. And so do you. Naomi's eyes burned. What are you saying? I'm saying, let me help. He ground out. Let me protect her. Protect both of you. Her breath caught, torn between anger and longing. And what's the price of your protection? Ethan's gaze softened then unexpectedly. There is no price, except that you let me be her father. After he left, Naomi sat by Bella's crib, stroking her daughter's curls. The child slept soundly, untouched by headlines or tension. Naomi whispered into the quiet. I don't know if letting him in will save us or destroy us. Her reflection in the window stared back, tired but resolute. She had spent 10 months shielding Bella from the world, but maybe the world was already here, knocking on her door, in the form of a man she once trusted for a single night. Meanwhile, Ethan stood in his Manhattan penthouse, staring at the skyline he had conquered. For years he had measured success by numbers, by towers built in his name, by headlines that called him untouchable. But now the only number that mattered was 10 months he would never get back. 10 months his daughter had grown without him, and the headlines didn't feel like power anymore. They felt like threat. Because for the first time, Ethan had something he couldn't afford to lose. When Naomi finally agreed to meet Ethan halfway, it wasn't in boardrooms or penthouses. It was in a quiet park in Atlanta, where Bella could roll on a blanket beneath the trees while her parents sat in uneasy silence. Ethan watched Bella with wonder, Naomi with caution. Every word between them felt like balancing on glass, fragile, dangerous, one wrong step from shattering. But as Bella reached out, grabbing a leaf with chubby fingers and laughing, Ethan whispered almost to himself, She has your smile. Naomi looked at him, then truly looked, and for the first time, she saw not the billionaire, not the storm, but a man caught in the same fear as her. Still, her voice was steady. This doesn't mean I trust you. Ethan met her gaze unflinching. Then, let me earn it. By the time they left the park, the sky had turned amber, the air heavy with the promise of rain. Naomi strapped Bella into her carrier, her chest tightening with a truth she couldn't ignore. Ethan wasn't leaving. Not now. Not ever. As they parted ways, Ethan's words lingered in the air like an oath. I will be in her life, Naomi, one way or another. And Naomi, walking home with her daughter pressed against her, whispered to herself, "Then God help us all." Because storms didn't end, they evolved. And this one was only growing stronger. Ethan Walker had built his empire by mastering silence. In boardrooms, silence made men nervous. In negotiations, silence forced others to fill the air with concessions. But silence at a park bench, while his daughter reached for his tie with sticky fingers, was nothing short of terrifying. He had conquered hostile takeovers, defied Wall Street critics, and sat across from leaders of nations. Yet the gurgling laugh of a 10-month-old child unstitched him in ways nothing else ever had. Naomi watched from across the blanket arms, folded every muscle of her body, alert. She hadn't trusted Ethan enough to leave him alone with Bella yet, so this meeting was another supervised experiment. Ethan knelt clumsily, suit jacket discarded on the grass. Bella reached for his wristwatch, squealing when the metal caught the sunlight. Ethan hesitated, unsure how to respond, until Naomi finally said, "Just let her grab it. She won't break it." He did. Bella slapped her tiny palms against the watch face, giggling at her own reflection. Ethan's throat tightened. She likes shiny things. Naomi's lips curved faintly. She likes discovering the world. Everything is new to her. Ethan studied the child's fascination, his voice low. She makes me feel like everything could be new for me too. The words weren't meant for Naomi, but they reached her anyway. And though she wanted to harden herself against them, something inside her shifted. That night, Ethan stood alone in his Manhattan penthouse. The city spread beneath him like an empire of glass and steel. Bella's laughter still echoed in his chest, but so did another voice, one that lived deep in his memory. "You are not here to play," Richard Walker's voice thundered sharp as the leather belt he carried in hand. "You are here to win, and winners do not cry." Ethan, 10 years old, had tried not to flinch, not to show fear. His father hated weakness, and weakness invited punishment. He remembered standing in the study, the smell of scotch heavy in the air, while Richard lectured him about legacy, about power, about how love had no place in a Walker man's life. "Love is weakness," Richard had said, eyes cold as ice, "and weakness destroys empires." Ethan had believed him once, but Bella's tiny laugh was rewriting that lesson. The next week, Ethan insisted on more time. Naomi resisted, but eventually agreed to short visits at her apartment. He arrived with an armful of toys, most of them too advanced for Bella's age. Naomi arched an eyebrow. "She doesn't need a mini piano, Ethan. She needs rattles and teething rings." Ethan looked genuinely baffled. "I Googled best toys for infants." Naomi almost laughed. "Google doesn't know, Bella. I do." So Ethan sat cross-legged on the floor with Bella while Naomi guided him. His tie was yanked, his shirt drooled on his expensive watch gnawed, and yet he looked more at peace than Naomi had ever seen. At one point, Bella clapped her hands, babbling nonsense syllables, and Ethan froze. What did she say? Naomi smirked. Nothing. Just baby talk. Ethan shook his head, wonder softening his features. It's everything, but peace never lasted long in Ethan's world. Richard Walker arrived at his son's penthouse uninvited as always. His silver hair was slicked back, his cane tapping against marble with sharp rhythm. Age had not softened him. If anything, it had sharpened his disdain. I read the papers. Richard began, voice cutting through the air like a blade. A child. With some woman plucked out of obscurity. Have you lost your mind? Ethan's jaw clenched. Her name is Naomi Carter, and the child is my daughter. Richard sneered, Do you have any idea what this does to the company? To the family name? I don't care about the company right now. Ethan's voice dropped dangerous. I care about her. Care? Richard's laugh was hollow. You sound like your mother. She cared. And where did that get her dead before 40, broken by sentiment? Ethan's hands curled into fists. Don't talk about her. Richard leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Then hear me, boy. You will end this farce. Send the woman away. Sign whatever papers you must. Pay her off. But you will not chain yourself to weakness. Ethan's chest heaved. Bella is not weakness. Richard's voice was steel. Then she will be your ruin. Naomi didn't know the details of Ethan's confrontation with his father, but she saw the weight he carried when he showed up the next day. His suit was perfect, but his eyes were storm cloud dark. Still, he dropped to the floor with Bella letting her tug at his sleeve until the storm inside him eased. Naomi watched, arms crossed, but softer this time. She had expected him to falter, to prove unreliable. Instead, he kept coming back, again and again. Why do you keep trying? She asked quietly one evening after Bella finally fell asleep. Ethan looked at her, his voice rough but steady. Because I know what it feels like to grow up with a father who wasn't there. I won't let her live that. Naomi's heart clenched. For once, she saw not the billionaire, not the storm, but the boy he had once been, alone in a house too big under the shadow of a man who didn't know love. It wasn't trust yet, but something was shifting. One night, Bella refused to sleep, wailing, until Naomi was on the brink of tears herself. Ethan took her, gently pacing the small living room with a patience Naomi hadn't expected. He hummed softly, off-key, awkward, but steady, and Bella's cries dwindled until her tiny body slumped against his chest. Naomi stared, stunned. You calmed her. Ethan's lips curved faintly. She doesn't care about perfection. She just cares that I stayed. Naomi looked away quickly, but her chest tightened in ways she didn't want to admit. But outside the walls of Naomi's apartment, the world grew louder. More headlines surfaced. Investors whispered. Richard loomed. And Naomi knew this fragile arrangement could not last. Ethan was learning to be a father, yes. But the question lingered sharp and unspoken. Would he still fight for them when the cost of love clashed with the empire he had built? Naomi kissed Bella's curls one night, whispering softly, "Storms always circle back." And in Manhattan, Ethan stood at his office window, fists clenched, as his father's words echoed in his mind. Love is weakness. Weakness destroys empires. But Ethan was beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, love was the only empire worth building. Naomi Carter had learned to live with storms. She had weathered pregnancy alone, sleepless nights, whispers of neighbors who saw her belly swell without a wedding ring. She had even survived the sharp lens of cameras outside her door. But nothing prepared her for betrayal, the kind that doesn't come from enemies, but from those you almost began to trust. It happened on a gray morning. Naomi sipped lukewarm coffee at her kitchen table, while Bella played on a blanket nearby, babbling to a stuffed bear. Her phone buzzed, another notification from the endless cascade of articles that had plagued her since the gala. She almost ignored it, but the headline froze her hand mid-air. Walker legacy at risk, secret negotiations with child's mother surface. The article went further, detailing alleged settlement talks between Ethan Walker and Naomi Carter, suggesting she was bargaining custody for money that she was angling for a trust fund in exchange for silence. Naomi's chest hollowed, her vision blurred with rage, because the words sounded too precise, too intimate to be pure speculation. Someone had fed them details, someone close to Ethan. By the time Jasmine arrived with groceries, Naomi was pacing the living room, fury radiating from her like heat. "He did this," Naomi hissed, shoving the phone into Jasmine's hands. "He made me look like I'm selling my child, like I'm nothing but a payday." Jasmine's jaw tightened. "And you think he leaked it? Who else knows enough to tell them?" Naomi demanded. Her friend didn't answer, because the silence said enough. Ethan arrived that evening, shoulders taut beneath his coat, exhaustion etched across his face. He carried Bella's favorite teething toy, but Naomi snatched it from his hand before he could cross the room. "Don't," she snapped. Ethan froze. "What happened?" Naomi shoved the phone into his chest. You happened." He scanned the article, jaw tightening, but his eyes lifted to hers with shock. "You think I gave them this?" Who else could have? Naomi's voice cracked sharp with betrayal. "Do you realize what this makes me look like? Do you understand what people will whisper about my daughter when she's old enough to read?" Ethan's voice dropped to a rasp. "I would never weaponize her like that." Naomi's laugh was brittle. "You already have. Every headline, every photo. It's all about you. Not her, not me, you." For a moment, the storm between them was louder than the child who stirred restlessly in her crib. Ethan's shoulders sagged, but his eyes burned with something fierce. "Naomi," he said softly, almost pleading, "if you believe nothing else, believe this. I will fight the world to protect her, not expose her." Her arms folded tight against her chest. "Then prove it. Because right now I don't see a father. I see a man protecting his empire." The silence that followed was more brutal than shouting. Hours later, Ethan stood in his office, the article spread across his desk. He didn't need to ask who had fed the press. The fingerprints were obvious. Richard Walker sat across from him, whiskey glass in hand, expression smug. "You're welcome," Richard drawled. "I gave you a door out. The public will believe she's after your money, which means you can take the child without guilt." Ethan's fists clenched. "You endangered them. You turned Naomi into a target." Richard's gaze was cold. "Naomi Carter is a distraction. A woman with no pedigree, no refinement. She will drag you down until everything you've built rots. End this before she ruins you." Ethan leaned forward, his voice a low growl. "The only thing rotting is your definition of family." Richard's eyes narrowed. "Don't be sentimental. It cost your mother everything. It will cost you more." But Ethan didn't answer, because for the first time, defiance burned hotter than fear of his father. Naomi avoided his calls for a week. When he finally showed up again, she didn't let him inside. She stood in the doorway, Bella in her arms, her face drawn with exhaustion. "You need to go," she said firmly. Ethan's heart lurched at the sight of them, his daughter's curls brushing her mother's cheek, Naomi's protective grip. But he forced himself to stand tall. "Naomi, please, I'm not the enemy." "Then why does it feel like I'm already losing?" Her eyes glistened, but her voice held steady. "Every step you take toward us feels like a step that could erase me from her life." Ethan's chest tightened. He wanted to argue, to swear he'd never erase her. But he knew promises sounded like lies when trust was already broken. So he said, I'll wait, however long it takes." And then he turned each step away, heavier than the empire on his shoulders. That evening, Naomi sat by Bella's crib, stroking her daughter's curls as the baby slept. Jasmine sat beside her, voice low. "You pushed him away," Jasmine said gently. Naomi's throat ached, because if I let him closer, he could destroy me. He could take her. Her friend was quiet for a moment. Or he could love her. Naomi shook her head. Love doesn't protect against men like Richard Walker, against headlines, against courts. Love isn't enough. But even as she said it, her chest betrayed her aching, with the memory of Ethan pacing the living room, humming softly until Bella's cries stilled. Across the city, Ethan stood on the terrace of his penthouse, the skyline glittering beneath him. For years, he had measured success by towers, numbers, wealth. But tonight, those things felt hollow. Because Naomi was right. If he couldn't protect her and Bella from his world, then he was no father at all. He poured his whiskey onto the marble floor, letting it burn in the night air. Then he whispered into the wind, "No more silence." It was a vow, though no one heard it, but the city itself. Days later, Naomi packed a small suitcase. She told herself it was temporary, a break from the noise. She needed air distance perspective. Jasmine offered her family's cabin in the Carolina mountains, a place without reporters or boardrooms, without men who carried storms into her life. She buckled Bella into her car seat, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "We'll be safe there." But as she pulled onto the highway, a single truth cut through her chest. Leaving didn't feel like freedom. It felt like goodbye. And goodbyes had a way of circling back when you least expected them. The road to the Carolina mountains curved like a ribbon Naomi Carter couldn't let go of. Each mile felt like a step further from chaos, further from headlines, from Ethan's blue eyes, from the storm his presence always summoned. The cabin sat on a quiet ridge above a lake surrounded by pines that sighed with the wind. For the first time in months, silence didn't feel like a threat. It felt like refuge. Naomi placed Bella's crib by the window, where moonlight filtered through branches, and whispered, "This is ours now. Just us." And yet even as she spoke the words, a shadow lingered at the edges of her heart. Because she knew storms didn't vanish. They waited. In Atlanta, Ethan Walker returned to Naomi's apartment and found the silence louder than he could bear. The crib was gone, the closet empty. The faint smell of her shampoo in the bathroom lingered like a ghost. He stood in the middle of the living room, chest, tight fists trembling. For a man who had controlled empires, silence had never undone him so completely. Marcus, his assistant, hovered at the doorway. She left no forwarding address. Ethan's voice cracked, though he forced it steady. "Find her." "Sir, if she doesn't want to be found." Ethan turned, eyes blazing. "She's the mother of my child. Do you think I'll let her disappear into the dark? Find her." Marcus hesitated, then nodded. But even Ethan knew some battles weren't won with money or investigators. Some battles demanded something rarer: patience. Naomi tried to make the cabin a home. She cooked simple meals, read Bella stories by the fireplace, let her daughter's laughter fill the wooden walls. Jasmine called every few days, bringing snippets of the outside world Naomi tried not to hear. "You know he's looking for you," Jasmine said one evening, her voice soft through the phone. Naomi closed her eyes. "I know. And I need space. Space to figure out if trusting him means saving Bella or losing her." Her friend didn't argue, but silence on the line was answer enough. It was a Saturday night when the storm returned, not the kind that rattled windows, but the kind that tightened Naomi's chest with terror. Bella's cry was different this time. Not hungry, not restless. A sharp, keening sound that broke Naomi in half. The fever came fast, burning hot against her skin. Naomi pressed cool cloths to her daughter's forehead, rocked her in her arms, whispered frantic lullabies. But Bella's cries only weakened into soft whimpers. Naomi's heart raced. The cabin was 20 minutes from the nearest town, 40 from a hospital. Rain hammered the roof, thunder rolling like judgment. She grabbed her keys, clutching Bella against her chest. "Hold on, baby, hold on." The winding mountain road, blurred through Naomi's tears. Headlights cut sharp arcs across the rain wipers, thrashed uselessly. She whispered to Bella with every breath promises more desperate than prayers. "You'll be okay. Mommy's here. Just hold on." Her hands clenched, the wheel knuckles white. Every turn felt like eternity. Every mile a battlefield against time. Back in New York, Ethan stood in his office, eyes scanning reports Marcus had compiled. Dozens of addresses, dozens of dead ends. But one line caught his attention. Jasmine Brown had taken extended leave from work, citing family matters. Ethan's chest tightened. Naomi. He called Jasmine. For the first time, his voice was stripped of pride. "Please, I don't care where. Just tell me she and Bella are safe." Jasmine hesitated, torn between loyalty and compassion. Finally, her voice cracked. "They're in the mountains. But Ethan, don't go there to claim her. Go there to fight for her. Or stay away." The line went dead. Ethan grabbed his coat. By the time Naomi staggered into the emergency room, Bella limp against her chest. Naomi was shaking so hard she could barely stand. Nurses rushed forward, voices calm but urgent. "We've got her. She's going to be okay." Naomi collapsed into a chair, tears breaking free. Her world, her heart, her everything lay behind a curtain, surrounded by strangers in scrubs. For once, Naomi had nothing left but hope. Minutes blurred into hours. When a doctor finally emerged, Naomi nearly fell trying to stand. "She's stable," the doctor said gently. "Viral infection. Dangerous if untreated, but you brought her in time. She'll recover." Naomi's knees buckled. Relief poured through her like rain after drought. When she turned, she saw him. Ethan stood at the end of the corridor, drenched from the rain, his coat clinging to him, hair plastered against his forehead. His eyes, those same storm-blue eyes Bella carried, were locked on Naomi, wide with fear and something deeper. Naomi froze. "How I told you," he rasped, voice breaking. "I'd find you." For a moment, pride and anger rose like shields. But then Bella's soft cry echoed from the room, and the shields cracked. Naomi's voice shook. Ethan was already moving his hand, catching hers before she could collapse. But she didn't. "She's here. She's alive." Naomi's throat closed, tears spilling freely. "I can't do this alone anymore." His grip tightened. "You'll never have to." They sat together in the small hospital room, Naomi in a chair, Ethan on the edge of Bella's bed. The machines beeped softly. Bella's breaths, even again. Ethan reached out, brushing a curl from his daughter's forehead with trembling fingers. "She's stronger than me," he whispered. Naomi's eyes lingered on him. "No, she's strong because she has both of us." For the first time in months, Ethan let himself breathe. Morning came pale and gentle through the hospital blinds. Bella stirred, blinking up at them, her eyes clear again. Ethan leaned close, pressing his forehead lightly against hers. Naomi watched, heart torn between fear and longing. She wanted to believe him, to believe in them. But the scars of betrayal were not so easily healed. Still, when Ethan looked up at her, voice steady, she didn't turn away. "Naomi," he said softly, "I can't undo the storm, but I can stand in it with you, if you'll let me." She exhaled, a sound caught between relief and surrender. "Then prove it," she whispered. As they left the hospital together, Bella cradled between them. Naomi knew this wasn't an ending. It was the pause before the next wave. Because Richard Walker still lurked in the shadows, and the world still watched for weakness. But for the first time, she wasn't walking into the storm alone. And that, she realized, might change everything. The hospital's fluorescent light had faded into memory, but the shadows it left behind clung to Naomi Carter. Bella was healthy again, her laughter filling the air like sunlight after a storm. Yet Naomi couldn't forget the sight of Ethan soaked in rain, eyes frantic, refusing to let her fall. For the first time, she wanted to believe him. For the first time, she almost did. But believing Ethan Walker meant believing he could stand against the very blood that had shaped him. And Richard Walker was not a man who let go of his empire or his son without a fight. The confrontation came on a Monday morning as Ethan prepared to present quarterly results. He had just reviewed Bella's latest photo. Naomi had texted him, tiny curls, tied in a bow gummy grin wide, when Marcus slipped into the office pale. "They've called an emergency board meeting." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Who, your father? He's pushing a vote to remove you as CEO." The words struck like a blade. Ethan rose, straightening his tie. His father's voice echoed in memory, "Love is weakness. Weakness destroys empires." But this time, Ethan carried something Richard never understood. Something more dangerous than wealth. Love. The boardroom gleamed with polished wood and glass, but the air felt like a battlefield. Richard Walker sat at the head, though the chair no longer belonged to him, his cane resting against the table like a scepter. "You've seen the headlines," Richard began, his voice smooth as poison. "Our company is bleeding reputation, because my son has entangled himself with a woman who seeks publicity, and a child with no legitimacy. Investors are restless. Confidence wanes. We cannot let personal weakness topple generations of power." Murmurs rippled around the table. Ethan's chest burned. "Say her name," he growled. Richard arched a brow. "Excuse me, her name is Naomi Carter. And she's not weakness. She's the strongest person I know. As for my daughter," Ethan's gaze cut across the room, unyielding. "Isabella Walker will never be a footnote in this company's history. She is my family, and if that threatens your precious empire, then burn it." Gasps broke out. Board members shifted uncomfortably. Richard's eyes narrowed, fury darkening his face. "This is not about family," Richard spat. "This is about survival." "No," Ethan said quietly, his voice like steel. "This is about control, and I won't be your pawn anymore." The vote began. Hours later, Ethan stood alone in his office, shoulders heavy. Marcus entered, expression tight. "They sided with him," Marcus said softly. "The majority voted to suspend your authority. You're CEO in name, but the board now controls decisions until further notice." Ethan's hand clenched against the desk. He had known it was coming. He had braced for it. But the sting was worse than he imagined. Not for himself, but for Naomi, for Bella, for the life he was trying to build outside the shadow of his father. Richard had taken his crown, but Ethan refused to let him touch what mattered most. Naomi learned of the fallout from Jasmine before Ethan could tell her. She sat on the porch of the cabin, Bella asleep in her arms, listening as her friend's voice trembled through the phone. He lost control of the company. His father orchestrated it. "Naomi, this is war." Naomi's stomach twisted. She had wanted Ethan to choose Bella over his empire, and now that he had the cost was staggering. Could she stand beside him while the world tore him apart? Or would staying mean, dragging Bella into battles she had no part in? That night, Naomi couldn't sleep. She walked the cabin's floorboards. Bella's soft breaths filling the quiet. Her heart screamed one truth: she loved her daughter more than anything. But her heart whispered another dangerous truth: she was starting to love Ethan too. Ethan arrived at the cabin the next day. His car crunched gravel, his figure emerging against the mountain backdrop. He looked worn, eyes shadowed, but his presence still filled the space like a storm contained in human form. Naomi met him at the door, arms folded. "Why didn't you tell me he didn't feign ignorance?" "Because it doesn't matter. The company isn't my life anymore." Her breath caught. But it was. For years, it was everything to you. Ethan's gaze softened. Not anymore. Not since her. His eyes flicked to Bella, who toddled across the floor squealing when she saw him. He scooped her into his arms, holding her tight. "This is everything." Naomi wanted to believe him. She almost did, but fear coiled in her chest. "And if your father pushes harder, if he drags me through courts, paints me as the woman who ruined you." Ethan's jaw hardened. "Then let him. I'll fight him with everything I have." Her eyes burned. "But will you still fight when it costs you more than money?" The silence between them cut deeper than shouting. 2 days later, Naomi's fears materialized. Her phone lit up with another headline. Walker heir faces custody. Battle court petition filed by Richard Walker. Naomi's blood ran cold. She read the lines twice, heart pounding. Richard had filed to challenge her guardianship, claiming Ethan was unfit and that Naomi was leveraging the child for financial gain. Her hands shook. Bella babbled on the rug, unaware of the war erupting over her head. Naomi pressed trembling fingers to her temple. "He's trying to take her," she whispered. Ethan arrived within hours, face pale with rage. He threw the papers onto the table. "This isn't me. It's him." He went behind my back. Naomi's chest ached, fury and fear colliding. "It doesn't matter whose hand signed it. It's your name, your blood. And now my daughter, our daughter, is in the middle of a fight she never asked for." Ethan's voice broke. "Naomi, please. I swear to you I will end this. I'll protect her. I'll protect you." But Naomi's eyes glistened with tears. "Then tell me, Ethan. Tell me why I should trust you when every storm in your life keeps swallowing mine." That night, they sat in silence while Bella slept. Naomi at the table, Ethan by the window, their breaths filling the room with a rhythm that was more ache than peace. Naomi wanted to scream, to demand he promise a future free of storms. But she knew promises like that were lies. What she needed wasn't words, it was proof. Ethan turned eyes dark with resolve. "I'll go to war with him, but not alone. I need you with me." Naomi's throat closed. She looked at Bella, peaceful in her crib, then back at Ethan, and for the first time, she whispered the truth she had buried. "I don't know if I'm strong enough to love you." His chest tightened, but instead of pleading, he stepped closer, his voice low. "Then let me carry the weight until you are." When dawn broke, the cabin felt fragile, as if the walls themselves knew they were sheltering more than a child. They were sheltering the thin line between family and fracture. Naomi stood by the window, Bella in her arms, watching Ethan load his car. He turned once, meeting her eyes across the distance. There was no smile, no promise, only determination, because Richard Walker had drawn his line. And now, Ethan and Naomi had to decide whether to stand on the same side or let the fracture consume them. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and old battles. Its marble columns reached toward the sky, like silent judges, older and colder than any man who had ever walked through its doors. Naomi Carter sat at the plaintiff's table, Bella on her lap, her heart pounding like it might break free from her ribs. Across the aisle, Richard Walker sat rigid, his silver hair gleaming beneath the lights, his lips curled in a smile that held no warmth. He looked not at Naomi, nor at Bella, but at Ethan, his son. Ethan, in a tailored suit that suddenly looked too heavy for his frame, did not return the stare. His eyes stayed fixed on Naomi and Bella, as if they were the only two anchors left in a world that had turned to storm. Richard's lawyer spoke with rehearsed venom, weaving narratives of greed, scandal, irresponsibility. "This child's mother," the lawyer declared, gesturing toward Naomi with thinly veiled contempt, "has no financial stability, no proven means to provide the life a Walker heir deserves. And Ethan Walker, though a capable businessman, is compromised by his reckless involvement with her. For the good of the child and the legacy, guardianship must be reassigned." Naomi's throat tightened. Every word was designed to erase her, to strip her down to nothing but a mistake. She held Bella closer, kissing her curls, refusing to flinch. Then Ethan rose. He didn't carry notes. He didn't need them. "This isn't about legacy," Ethan said, voice low, but steady, filling the chamber. "It's about control. My father believes love is weakness. He's spent his life trying to teach me that lesson. But standing here looking at my daughter, I realize he's wrong. Love isn't weakness. It's the only strength that outlives us." Richard's jaw tightened. Ethan went on, eyes never leaving Naomi. "Naomi Carter is the strongest woman I know. She raised Bella alone when I didn't even know she existed. She gave my daughter laughter, warmth, and safety. She gave her everything money can't buy. If you want to measure worth by bank accounts, you'll miss the truth entirely. Because family isn't built on ledgers. It's built here." He pressed a hand to his chest. "And here." He touched his daughter's curls soft against his palm. The room stilled. "For once in my life," Ethan said quietly, "I'm not fighting for a company. I'm fighting for them, and I will fight until I have nothing left to give." Richard slammed his cane against the floor. "You would throw away your birthright for them." Ethan turned his voice sharp with finality. "No, I would throw away your birthright. Because it was never mine. Not the way you wanted it to be. My legacy is not numbers or towers. My legacy is Bella. And I refuse to let you poison her life the way you poisoned mine." Gasps rippled through the chamber. For the first time, Richard looked unsettled, as though the sun he had sculpted into steel had turned the blade back on him. The judge, a woman with silver glasses and weary eyes, tapped her gavel once for silence. "I've heard enough," she said. "It's clear to this court that Naomi Carter has provided a safe, nurturing home for her child. And it is equally clear that Ethan Walker intends to honor his responsibilities as a father. Guardianship remains with the mother, with joint custody extended to the father." Petition denied. Naomi exhaled, her body trembling. The sound of the gavel striking echoed like a final thunderclap. And then it was over. Richard rose, his face carved in fury, but Ethan didn't look at him. Not anymore. His eyes were on Naomi. Outside the courthouse, the sky had cleared, sunlight spilling across the steps. Naomi stood with Bella in her arms, still stunned that the storm had passed. Ethan approached slowly, as though afraid to break the fragile peace. "It's done," he said softly. Naomi searched his face, searching for truth. "You gave up everything." He shook his head. "I gave up nothing that mattered." His voice cracked softer now. "But I don't want to lose you. Tell me there's a way back." Her chest tightened. She thought of the long nights alone, of Bella's fever, of the fear that had nearly broken her. But she also thought of Ethan's hands, trembling as he held their daughter, of his voice, steady in court, of the vow he had made in front of the world. "Ethan," she whispered, "I don't need grand gestures. I just need you to stay." His eyes softened, and for the first time she believed him when he said, "Always." Weeks later, the cabin was filled with the sound of laughter. Ethan carried Bella on his shoulders, her tiny hands tugging at his hair, while Naomi shook her head, laughing from the porch. "You're going to spoil her," Naomi teased. Ethan grinned, steadying his daughter. "She deserves to be spoiled with love." Naomi watched them, her chest swelling with a warmth she hadn't let herself feel in years. And for the first time, the word family didn't scare her. It felt like home. That night, as Bella slept peacefully between them, Ethan reached for Naomi's hand. "I can't promise the world will stop throwing storms at us," he said softly. Naomi squeezed his fingers. "Then we'll learn to dance in the rain." And in the quiet, with their daughter breathing steady in her crib, Naomi finally let herself believe in something she had almost forgotten forever. Months later, Central Park glowed with autumn light. Leaves drifted like fire across the pond, and Naomi, Ethan, and Bella walked hand in hand along the path. Bella chattered nonsense, her laughter scattering birds into the sky. Passers-by glanced at them, some with recognition, some with curiosity. But Naomi didn't care. For the first time, she wasn't hiding. Ethan leaned close, his lips brushing her temple. "We're really doing this." Naomi smiled, her eyes on their daughter. "No, she's doing this. She brought us here." Ethan's throat tightened. "Then maybe she's the empire we were always meant to build." Naomi looked at him, her heart steady, her love finally unguarded. The only one that matters. And as Bella toddled forward, clutching both their hands, the storm that had once threatened to destroy them now felt like the reason they had found each other at all. Because in the end, love had not been weakness. Love had been survival. And it was only the beginning.